I would never have thought of myself as a business news consumer. But something about the stories from the Ken feel different. They feel like they're written to engage and not merely to inform, to pique my interest and direct me to something curious happening in the world. I read Mutasim's writing in the Ken when his first story was published. It was about a private equity fund that was gaming the system by siphoning off funds from a school despite education being a not for profit subject in India. His second story was a deep dive into Bangalore's water crisis and how different actors were attempting to address it. These were not far off pieces about the illegible balance sheets of companies I had never heard of, but about the very real and insidious ways in which capital is shaping society. I read these and I knew I had to have him on. Mutasim is a young guy who left his 6 month old job at a private equity fund, fresh out of college, because he just couldn't bear it anymore. His shift to journalism is undercut by a sense of responsibility towards the world and towards documenting how it turns out. We chat about his big and risky career leap to journalism, his insights about the business world, and what a rapidly changing Bangalore looks like. So, episode 5 with Mutasim Khan, here it goes. Hi Mutasim, excited to have you here today and really looking forward to our conversation.
Hi Purvi. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. I know I responded to your email very late. Sorry for that.
No, that's
But
okay. Don't worry about it. I am sure the conversation will make up for the delay. So, I know there's a really fascinating story behind how you ended up
Mhm.
at the Ken and how you switched from working at a private equity fund right out of college to the field of journalism. So,
Yeah.
for the benefit of our listeners, could you please sort of relay that story to us?
So basically, just the story is that I started working at a private equity fund right out of college, and
What did you study in college exactly?
I did my bachelor's in economics, although I started out in chemistry. So IIT Kanpur allows sort of you changing branches at the end of your first year. So I did economics. My major is in economics, but I hardly ever like attended classes. So it's but I did learn a lot of stuff. But anyways, I digress. So yeah, I studied economics and started working at this private equity fund. And in the process of working, I saw that one of their largest sort of investment class was schools, and schools basically they would buy the real estate of schools. So schools are huge, so many buildings, so much land, and they had sort of bought many such schools in the country, and they were about to put it together with like other real estate stuff and IPO it, like list it to the public market. And this was the first time anybody was listing education, like school education, on the public market. So it was supposed to be a big deal, and they were about to IPO, I think 6 months after I left the place finally. But anyways, uh, the I didn't directly work on the school's deal, but the more I stayed there and the more I understood, it just seemed more and more like bizarre to me what was happening there. So basically, what they would do is, so you have a school and you have somebody who runs the school. Now, this somebody who runs the school is called an operating company. And then you have the buildings, land, whatever makes up the exterior facade of the school. This operating company is also a company. It is supposed to be an NGO, an NPO. Basically, that whatever profits it makes in the process of collecting fees from children, it has to put those profits back into education, back into the same school, right? After giving out salaries, after giving out costs, and this is well regulated by the government. I mean, in theory. So, schools are supposed to be not for profit, and this was laid out very early on, I think right after a few years after independence, where you had almost this sort of socialist rationale behind having schools not for profit. I've read the ruling, and it was something to the extent of, if you have investors, financial investors into schools, then I mean, education just becomes an asset class or whatever. So that's how the argument went. But again, what these people were doing is they would buy the real estate of the school, and they would also buy a majority shareholding in the operating company. So you imagine that, there's a landlord and a tenant who are negotiating rent, because if this guy owns the real estate, he's the landlord, and this guy is using the real estate, so they pay rent.
So the private equity fund that you were working at owned both, is what you're saying, or they
Yes,
invested in both.
yes, they owned both. They controlled both, right? Controlled as in they have their people on the board who vote on whatever major issues. So they basically ran the decision making. So you can imagine what was happening. It was a landlord and a tenant negotiating rent, but both of them were effectively owned by the same entity, or by the same person in the abstract, so to speak. So yeah, in my story, I start this as like this Fight Club kind of Fight Club esque thing, where it's the same person but behaving as two very different people and fighting together, like pretending to fight with itself. Uh, I mean, in the process of negotiating rent, because it's like fighting with someone. You want high rent, you want low rent, and as a result, they were siphoning off about 90% of the school's earnings just as rent. So, and this was happening across multiple, like many schools. And this is just this platform was about to IPO. So, by the way, I did not use any in this story. I did not sort of use any private information, even though I was not privy to much more private information than. So, I used whatever public sources to do it. And yeah, so the sorry, I skipped to the story. So basically, I was here. I was looking at this thing happening, and I was already, we can maybe talk about it later, but I was already a student journalist in my college. I was part of the student magazine, also part of more like radical collectives, like these feminist collectives, or worker collectives, and all of that. So that is the kind of type of journalism I was doing in my college. So yeah, I came here and I saw this, and it was just I mean, it is commonly well known fact that in private equity funds the culture is bad, which is basically to say that people have a free reign to be abusive and mask it in whatever thing. And it was so bad. I mean, I'm at a loss for words to explain. But that is, I think that is very common, otherwise also within corporate. But when I try to process it, I try to process it in a more like fundamental way. Like, what is it? Okay, this guy, matlab, he may be like hurling abuses at me, and that is okay. But what is it, like fundamentally, where is this coming from? Because my choice is either to switch to another similar kind of job where I'm betting that this kind of stuff is not happening. uh, but what does it mean to say that this kind of stuff is not happening? Okay, maybe the language there is pristine, but is my problem the language? And so I started thinking about it. And I think what dawned on me, I think slowly, but after one point, just was very clear to me that any kind of like corporate entity exists in a market, and this market works. It's premised on hierarchy. It's premised on sort of not inhumanity but ahumanity, a sort of like complete complete, like you don't even you don't address that there is a sort of human element in it. Anyway, so then I had a story, like a ready story in my hands, and yeah, I was feeling like this. So I thought, why not give it a try? So I reached out to the Ken for a job, not for this story. And then they said, okay, why don't you do a story first? I did this story. The story kind of ended up doing well. And then they were threatening a lawsuit against me,
Oh God.
against the publisher, the Ken. And the other added aspect was that had I not joined the Ken, I would have to like think about how to get any kind of resources to defend a lawsuit from a private equity fund who literally have like lawyers, like counsel on their payroll or whatever. So I thought, good, two
So
things.
had the story already been published when
Yeah,
they
yeah.
filed
This
the
is
lawsuit?
Story had been published. They did not know I was doing the story before I published the story. I could not tell them because obviously
And you'd started working on the story when you were at the fund itself, is
started
it?
I had started working on it, like collecting different things while I was working there, because I knew at some point I want to do this story. But I published it after I left. So anyway, so my first story was not me as a writer for the Ken. It was a contributor piece, so to speak, and then I switched to Ken full time. So yeah, it was a very sudden jump, kind of lucky kind of thing. Otherwise, I think it would have been very difficult to find a journalist job otherwise, because you don't come from that background, or you have to start as a reporter. You can't write long form investigative pieces, and you take years to get there. Again, the model is like, you just jump right into it, do whatever, uh, and do whatever. So yeah, that's how I got to journalism. Sorry, I think I went on like 100 different
No,
directions.
no, that's really interesting, I think. So what you're saying is that it was both the culture of these of this office as well as what they were doing on a broader level, right? So could you talk a little bit more about what these funds do, how they make their money, and what their sort of role is in society right now?
No, absolutely. So basically, there are two parts to what you said, and I think both are interesting, and I have at some point thought at length about them. The first is what is happening generally, and private equity firms are probably a more extreme manifestation of what is also happening everywhere else, startups and you know your big companies also. So I kept having even during the time when I was there. And still I keep having conversations with my batchmates and my friends who are working at all of these other places, and they are not very dissimilar in the sense that there is an idea of meritocracy which runs right from your college, like your IIT, uh, and then through the job thing, which is very static, sort of very stupid, and like I said, very ahuman. And that seems to be modus operandi for getting more work done, or working at like a well-oiled capitalist machine. It's like almost like somebody owns your time and somebody owns your labor, and it was not always like this. So that is the sense I keep getting from my friends. It's not like they're just going to a place to work, but the work wants the work rewards people who have the work consume them, and just become their life, and whatever. So on that level, so that is what everybody, I think, to some extent is feeling. Apart from that, there may be exceptions, but more specifically, when it comes to private equity funds, these are funds which, one, have produced the largest number of billionaires in the world. Okay, they're all been these private equity guys. Second, they are in control of vast amounts of capital, right? So this fund that I worked at, it was $1 billion, 1 billion with a B dollars in assets under management in India. It's more than one, but the last recorded number was one. So you see, just the amount of capital that you have, and it's like, even a few crores are like, they're just like rounding errors in your book, or whatever, right? And they are this is capital from the richest people in the world. So basically the idea is that if you're really really rich, you also have pension funds and these big institutions and banks. But if you're really rich, you give your money to these funds, and they tell you, we'll take this money and we'll give you back much more than this money. How? We will buy out a business, and make some tweaks to it, and when it grows, we'll sell it. Just like land value appreciates over time, values of businesses also appreciate over time. And then when we sell it, whatever money we get, we'll give a lot of it to you and some of it for ourselves. And that some of it is a percentage of that total money, but that total money is so huge that these guys end up making a lot of money. But also notice that these guys earn money irrespective of whether or not the investment does well. So they're taking a fees on managing this money, and it comes to them either ways, right? So this is the basic funda. Yeah.
Okay. And since your first story was about education and the sort of granular ways in which a private equity fund like the one you were working at, is shaping education at a broader level. So, how do you think the idea of education is changing for us culturally in terms of how the state is looking at it? And private schools have existed for a long time, but there's clearly some kind of shift happening right now. So, from your understanding, could you talk a little bit about how you are perceiving this shift to be right now?
So I think just the common sort of conflict here. So even though I spoke about this education thing with this private equity body, I don't necessarily mean to say that they are bad actors. They're not really bad actors. I mean, you could remove that private equity fund and replace it with a private equity fund with much nicer people who are much more progressive or whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. They are working under an incentive structure that is baked into I mean, the very system that they're working under. So it's like, uh, so it's a structural thing. It's a structural incentive
So,
based.
incentive for profit, right? At the core of it, it's that, right?
Exactly, the incentive for profit. And so so if you look at it in a more broader structural sense, in India, public schools are at a dearth for money, like a lot. Like you have probably, if you ever been on that corner of the internet, you know what kind of shit goes on in public schools, right? And increasingly you have these, so whatever you have, your way to economic mobility increasingly and most visibly is going through these entrance exams, JEE, NEET, all of these kinds of entrance exams or more state based entrance exams. And increasingly, because the level of the sort of quality of education is so bad in public schools, you have people increasingly from private schools who are making into these places, right? So one that is uh, automatically creating a larger fissure in this, like, have demographic and the larger have not demographic.
So you're saying that since the quality of public education is so bad in the country, it is increasingly the people with private education backgrounds that are being able to
Exactly.
climb up the ladder.
Exactly. And when you look at a macro level, then you just see that gap is just increasing because this quality differential is just increasing. But that's okay. That's still obvious. But what is also, like, I think happening because of this is that middle class, working class people increasingly want to send their children to better schools, to better private schools. And it's not like, it's like one of those things where you cannot really, I mean, even if it's very expensive, you'll just end up paying it. It's not like a phone, it's not like a vacation. It's something absolutely necessary to your family's child's future, right? So you have education created it in India, where a way in a way where you have this very you have this large demographic of people who are trying to get their children better education, because for which they have to pay a lot more than they can typically afford. And within these, so you have, if you look at this as a market from a private equity fund's perspective, isn't a desperate parent like the perfect consumer, right? I mean, they're not going to they don't have a choice, essentially, right? They have to go to the private school which is closest in their geography, which is better, right? So this creates a very, and this is not me saying it, it's their documents. If you read their documents in very, I think, decorative language, they're saying exactly this. They're saying that parents, they give the example that during COVID everything took a hit. Schools and hospitals did not take a hit, right? So I don't know. There is something perverse about using this as a rationale for selling education. But whatever. So that is where you're seeing a lot of, like, then a lot of these private players come in, and private players come in for profit. I mean, whatever they say, if you look at it from a on a structural level, it ends up, the implication ends up being whether or not people there, like specific people there, are bad or intended, the effect ends up being like extractive, uh, right? And this is echoing across higher education institute.
And what was bothering you so much about working at a private equity fund that was associated with a project like this, that you ultimately had to switch jobs or switch careers even?
Yeah, I think this kind of gets to you, like doing this kind of thing. in a market, because you are at a position of so much power, even if it is just perceived, that you're at this, you're at the top of the food chain of like high finance, and you're controlling so much money or whatever. I think that fundamentally sort of ends up changing people a little bit. Not everybody necessarily, but that is the general sort of sense I got. Everything is a resource and everything is an input, and stuff like that. So that pervaded sort of the office atmosphere. So for example, they would just keep talking about their expensive watches, and they would like go around, they would go out for drinks and spend lakhs on the bill or whatever. So all of these things, these extravagant kind of things. But if they're coming from a system which is so deeply unequal and so deeply oppressive,
Hmm.
and you're at the sort of at the apex end of that system, then I think a lot of those tendencies of domination, of extraction by any means, of this cold rush for returns, I think that really translates into how you end up treating people. And so that was one thing. But again, I mean, this kind of hierarchy would be present in some form or the other at everywhere else also, broadly
Hmm.
everywhere else also, which is
Hmm.
what I was getting from my peers. So then I thought that it's um, probably best to look for something which is like completely different, like work wise, where it like, so you have different selves, right? I mean, I have different selves that I embody in different situations, and there are selves that you want to embody that are more you, so to speak, than not you. So I wanted my work to embody the self which is more me, and which feels more me, which does not involve pretense as much, and has to be honest. So that is what I try,
Which is what?
which is something like public writing, something like journalism, something approximating journalism, where I am trying to make sense of the society with a responsibility to my readership. So I look at it as I look at it as a very theory generating work, where I am sort of trying to give new ways of looking at things, and that those new ways are uniquely mine, right? So another thing, when you're working, my colleagues and we were talking about it a few days back, is when you're working different kinds of jobs. Like for example, let's say you're a data analyst or you're working in finance or whatever. Your product, like whatever, so you're doing some labor and you're creating some product. Your product does not necessarily have you in it. It need not, right? The same work you're doing, somebody else can do, right? And if that is true, then the product does not really have matlab, your agency or a,
A stamp of
yeah.
you.
But that is not true in a job like journalism, where you can give two people the same sets of facts but they won't write the same story, right? Which means that there is something that you also uniquely bring to this kind of thing. So this second thing, I know this is a, like, I don't know if you heard of it, this, there is this Marxist term called alienation, which is basically this, that after you went into like factory production, etc., happened, you were very alienated from the product of your labor. uh, and so this also, this feeling of alienation, that is very very prominent, at least in my friend group and people I talk and meet, and that was very prominent in my previous job. So I wanted to try and see what it was like moving away from it and trying something different. So that was the idea.
Yeah, I think I feel that cultural sort of sense of alienation around me, maybe increasingly so right now. Um, and another thing I've noticed in your stories is that they seem to come from everyday living or everyday experiences and how you encounter the business ecosystem in your daily life. So, what is it like for you to live in Bangalore, and what are the ways in which this ecosystem sort of enters your life on a daily basis?
So I have been in Bangalore for about 5 months now, and I think I had the most amount of interaction with the city when I did a story. Otherwise, I'm like a pretty lazy person. You won't see me going out much, or not necessarily having that urge to explore, or whatever. But still, from what I've gathered, there is not one Bangalore. There are like a lot of different Bangalores. Once you travel from Indiranagar to, let's say, Sarjapur, it's a completely different kind of world, which is more testament to the how rapidly Bangalore has been developing its real estate and been sort of expanding the city, because there is so much influx, so many GCCs coming in, so much
What is a
influx of.
GCC?
The GCC is basically a global capability center. These large office parks, which house like so many different kinds of like offices. Those are GCCs. So, for example, a Bagman in Bangalore, I think would count as a GCC. So yeah, it's this rapid development, and you can see the farther away you go into Bangalore, and now it's always dusty, and you can almost see the remnants of whatever nature was there before, and now it's just gone. In fact, I was reading they recently paved over another lake. I mean, a private builder paved over another lake, like paved cement over another lake again to build an office complex or something like that. So yeah, I think that once you start moving out, it becomes pretty visible. But otherwise, Indiranagar is very nice. You can just, I don't know, you ever
Yeah, I
been to
used to live
Indiranagar?
in Indiranagar actually. My office
Oh,
was in
that is
Indiranagar as well,
where,
very
where
close to the
exactly?
Ken office. Um, it was on 9th Main, I think, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, very close. Basically, very close to Bob's.
Yeah, I was really
Uh,
close to
Living
Bob's.
close.
I was on that, what is that street called?
100 feet road.
Yeah, 100 feet road.
Yeah.
I was on a street that was perpendicular to 100 feet road. So we would go to Bob's really often. And yeah, my apartment was really close to where I work. So I would walk to work, which is a
Yeah, I
dream
think
in Bangalore, really. And
it's
compared to
safe.
Sharjapur and Belandur, it was a really, really
Yeah,
quaint
it's
part of the city.
Yeah, I mean, I would every wherever I'm working, I would like to have this setup. I come home for lunch, and it's very nice. You don't have to worry a lot. You take your time to get ready and all that.
Yeah.
So that's nice. But yeah, generally, it's a lot of like it's a very young people place, Indiranagar, and you go out and you go out at 2 in the night, and you still have everything is sort of alive and sprawling. So yeah, but at the same time, there is also this other aspect of that people move here for jobs, and a lot of my friends are either in Bangalore or in Gurgaon or in Bombay. I mean, that's basically majority of what the distribution looks like. And I think there is definitely a startup vibe to Bangalore, and there is a sort of uh, an increasingly business logic which people end up adopting, because when you come to Bangalore, and this is I think a difference between Bangalore and Bombay. In Bangalore, since you have all of this so much startup concentration, the conversation is more like business as a way of life, right? Business as purpose. You're building something, and you put your life to it. Is that hustle culture? So even when I'm talking to my sources, I find that their thinking about life is very analogical, in that they will always relate either their life experiences translated into a business insight or the other way around. And that
What do you mean? Can you give an example?
sure. So I was meeting somebody yesterday, and that somebody was he was talking about some sort of event in his life where he had to be patient to get what he wanted, and then how that sort of informed now how he thinks about his business model, or something like that.
So
Stuff
it's
like
like
this.
your life is constantly feeding into your work, and your work is constantly feeding into your life.
For sure. And it's like it becomes an ethic, so to speak, where now you will use analogy, like you will use EBITDA to not EBITDA is a finance term. You will use EBITDA to describe some every day. You will use increasingly optimization language. So I was talking to a friend yesterday, and he's telling me we were ordering food, and he's telling me something like he wants to optimize for cheese or something. And so it's just that I see that a lot more in Bangalore than in Bombay, where this vocabulary around business and this thing very much seeps into your everyday interactions and everyday life. And I think this would differ based on circles, but you constantly are also hearing of people who did a startup and made it big, and now living the life, and they're um, financially independent. They don't have to work for anybody. So I think that's romanticized a lot, and then you have the general sense of upbeat possibility. Oh, we can do whatever. That's generally what I feel here. But also, then you have this increasing thing about just building some kind of AI as a service business, which gets you quick funding and gets you whatever. So there's also that side of it, which is again very, very templatized, opportunist in a way, but not in a judgmental way, just opportunist in a way of riding this whatever wave they see coming. But then there are also people who are like genuinely making brands and making businesses, and they have some sort of meaning attached to it and purpose attached to it. So yeah.
Yeah. I also found your second story. I think that was your second story, right? About the water tanker mafia
Oh
is
yeah,
very
yeah, yeah,
interesting
yeah,
because it really brought to the fore this kind of hidden relationship between the government and this informal network that they have called the mafia.
yeah,
And showed in a way how these networks, informal networks, are actually running the city.
yeah. And I think this goes back to our point about this rapid. I want to call it residentialization, but I don't know if that's a word of Bangalore. Is that again you built so quickly that your living basic living conditions, the infrastructure that was required for that, couldn't keep up with the speed at all. And this is most visible in Bangalore's water problem. And but by the way, there are more than just the timing angle to it. I'll come to that. There's also a huge funding, financial angle to it. BWSSB, the water sort of water body, Bangalore actually has a lot of debt from a Japanese fund. But I'll come to that. But so basically, I was saying that so water is with the water problem is one of the more stark manifestations of this thing, and it was very bad. It is also very bad right now. I just saw news that there is like acute water shortage and people are suffering. But anyway, so what basically ended up happening is BWSSB could not build pipes like water pipes right until it was expanding, but the water pipes are not keeping up. So this entire outer ring road area, Belandur, Sarjapur, and this tech corridor, where all these new people coming to work are essentially moving, new offices are moving. They did not have access to water pipes.
Yeah, actually, some
So
context here would be helpful to the listeners, which is that areas such as Belandur and Sharjapur, which now primarily hold a lot of these corporate offices where a lot of young people migrate to work. These areas were formerly agricultural land, which were then taken
yes,
over and converted into these huge office complexes, so to speak. Entire sort of residential spaces have been set up around these offices primarily to feed the places that the people living there work at.
yes, and actually that connects to what I was also talking about. Is that then in the absence of the government being able to provide this infrastructure, locals stepped up, and what they started is they started running a tanker service. Now, what the tanker service is basically they would dig bore wells, a lot of the times illegally also. They would dig deep into the ground, take out this water, and supply to all around the area to buildings and everything. Now, imagine it's a water tanker economy that over time is taking care of like millions of people, right? And who are these operators largely? Is farmers or people who were living in these villages or come from nearby villages. So these people came in and actually started.
Yeah, that's actually quite an ingenious solution.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, because they were farmers, they already were. I mean, they already were part of the water supply chain or whatever. Because you need a lot of. So they were also naturally positioned to be this. But there has been a narrative around them which sort of the government has mostly created, is that these are water mafia, which is that they charge insane amount of rates to get you water, and these are all they're part of like an organized thing, and nobody lowers their price, everybody is keeping it up. While that may have been true in pockets, my reporting largely suggested that they work on modest profit margins because it is very expensive to, like, for example, pump up water from a borewell requires a lot of electricity, fuel for the truck, especially with fuel prices rising. So these people were working at normal 15-20% margins, which is okay for a kind of logistics business. So there was nothing to suggest that they were mafia, so to speak. But yeah, so the government ran with this whole idea of water tanker mafia, and the government said, we'll combat the water tanker mafia. So the government launched an app which was called Sanchari Kaveri, which was basically tanker service, but under the government banner. And the government realized they do not own enough tankers to actually run the demand which these water tankers were serving. So they ended up paying fees to this very same, like daily rent to this very same tanker mafia to operate under their Sanchari Kaveri model. So it's now
Basically, they had to ask for help from the same people that they were calling
they were
mafia.
calling mafia. Why? Because otherwise the government had to buy their own trucks, buy
Right.
their own drivers, spend a lot of money, and it can't do that because it's very very deep in debt. It has taken around 16, 17,000 crores from a Japan infrastructure fund. And although the terms of the agreement are not clear, but obviously nobody gives you anything for free, right? So then you're also under that pressure to to pay financially. So the BWSSB I'm talking about is under this kind of debt. So all of this just feeds into itself, and it becomes a situation where people are like fine with the tanker mafia. I mean, it's dependable supply. The government can't even supply dependently into these areas, because the river Kaveri river, where the water comes from, is like does not have enough water. It dries up, especially in the summer. So they have a limited amount of water they can take, so there's a lot of water cuts. And even in places where the pipeline is working, people still need additional water, and they still are paying the tanker mafia, quote unquote tanker mafia, to get them this kind of water. So yeah, it's a very interesting intersection of different things.
Right. Your stories are a lot about, how this business world is working behind the scenes. For example, even in the NBFC story, which is NBFC as a non-banking financial company story, you brought to light how these companies were preying on, the most sort of desperate loan seekers or people at the bottom rung of the financial
No,
strata.
no. By the way, so about this NBFC story, I know this is so for context to listeners, it is basically like loan giving, a lot of loan giving companies that give out loans at annual interest of 600, 700%, and under the current regulatory scheme, that's perfectly legal. So that is the context. And you would think, like how you're saying, is that these borrowers who supposedly are stupid enough to fall for these loans, or are like these at the bottom of the ladder. What I found out is people who are victims to these loan apps are not just necessarily people who are at the bottom of the ladder, or poor people, so to speak. Or like, for example, when I was discussing this in my org, there was a lot of this kind of framing, right, where it's this far away stupid dude, like, and that also is like part of the argument of there being a free market, that, oh, it was your choice, you were stupid, why did you not do it? But what I found was, it is actually the way they work is, it can just swallow anyone. In fact, after I did the story, I got messages from three Ken subscribers. Now Ken subscribers are paying 5 6 thousand a year for to read journalism. Okay, they are this salaried, like sort of elite salaried class employees. Even borrowers I spoke to, somebody earning 3 lakhs a month, and still fell into this trap. Why? Because they are using these kinds of they're using algorithmic power, which when you use at scale, if you bombard enough people with ads at the right time with the right kind of messaging, you will have a hit rate. You will have somebody who's crying because their mother needs treatment. And even though they're not like poor, so to speak, but they want a loan, like they want money in 15 minutes. They don't care, they don't read through the fine print, and then they end up going this way. So
Got
I'm
it.
saying just that in this particular instance, right, it is not just that this exploitation is reaching people who are at the bottom of the ladder, because now it is algorithmic, it is like everywhere, and that is why it becomes an even more urgent sort of problem.
Also, how do you find sources for your stories? Do you have a process for that? Because a lot of your sources, I'm guessing, um, are people who might not have very positive things to say about the place they might be working at. And a lot of them are also sort of informal sources, like a
Yeah.
Rapido driver or maybe the driver who's driving the water tanker. So, yeah, do you have a process for the sourcing of your sources?
Yes. So, I think I should just premise this by saying that this is again where journalism is very different from different jobs, because you, even though your name is on the byline, it is not by any stretch of the imagination your story, so to speak, right? If anything, it is the story of everyone else that you talk to and everything else that is happening, and you're just doing the work of putting it together. So, a society which is afraid, a society which is constantly self censoring and constantly under threat, is also a society which will not produce very good journalism as often, because it's a collective project, right? For example, for this NBFC story, I've had to talk to borrowers, right, who got into this, who got sort of were victims of this kind of thing. And it was possible because one borrower I spoke to had been doing a like extensive documentation. He was just reaching out to people because it had happened to him. He was just like doing it out of pure like action,
So, how did you find this first borrower?
through Reddit.
Whoa, that's
Reddit is
crazy.
Reddit is a crazy place.
So,
Yeah.
you just like found his email or something
No,
on Reddit?
I just DM'd him on Reddit, and turns out that this guy was also running a sort of a collective around this and doing all that work. So my story would not have been half my story had this guy not put in the work. So it is a kind of collective labor. And so, like you were saying, it's very hard to find people who are going to be candid. I mean, corporate speak is just perfectly normal and accepted. And my editors and my chief editors tell me that it has gotten way worse over time. When they earlier used to write and earlier used to talk to sources, they were like, people had a point of view. Sure, you're working in an organization, but it was still like the dominant understanding was, okay, you can have a point of view, you can have a critical point of view still. I mean, to a larger
About
extent,
the organization.
about the organization or about issues. Okay, maybe about the government, maybe about the regulator. God forbid anybody say anything against the regulator on record. My God, I mean, I have to anonymize the name, goes without saying, right? Only people who will say even something faintly are people who have now retired and now are on the board and who don't really.
Regulator, as in the RBI in this
The
case,
RBI
maybe.
in this case, or any other government body who's the regulator, whichever case I'm doing. So that is a thing. Yeah, the larger point was that your probably becomes more obvious when I put it like this. But the kind of journalism your society produces is also a reflection of what kind of a society it is. But I also mean more specifically for my stories, and then it becomes really difficult, to get that. So there's this added thing of having people trust you as a journalist, and having people trust that you're going to do justice to this. And there has to be honesty and transparency, and all of those things. So I think definitely becomes more challenging. For me, there is no structured way. It is very random. I'll reach out to people online. Maybe I'll try to request people for a meeting, and then things happen like that. Plus there is a lot of documentation online, a lot of consumer forums online where you can get in touch with people if you use them enough. So that is usually there, but there's no like no process as such. It's always very much spontaneous and contextual to what I'm doing then. Although my Bangalore water supply story was different because it was an urban infra story, and I actually went to BWSSB office, and I spoke to an officer from the BWSSB at a like he was smoking a cigarette, and I was also there, and that is where I met him, and we had a conversation, and that is where I got a lot of what is happening. No, cannot admit this conversation. Cannot quote him, cannot do anything because it was completely off record. But yeah, so these are the kind of things. Then I went
You
to
told him you were a journalist.
I did tell him that I'm a journalist, and I did tell him that this is what I'm trying to look into. And he told me, they're not allowed to talk
Hmm.
to journalists like this. You
Hmm.
have to do it through proper channels. But still, he let me in on a few things here and there. Which were admissible, but gave me direction.
And what about the people running the tankers? How did you meet them?
Oh, that was hard. So I had to go through another source who had a trusted who had a person who trusted him, and so this guy referred me to, saying that, oh, this guy's fine, don't worry, he's not going to use your name, or he's not going to do anything. So yeah, that plus they also had an incentive, which is to say that this whole rhetoric around mafia becomes so pervasive that the moment they thought that I was open to listening to a different kind of story, they were like, sure. And then we had a long conversation, and he let me in on a lot of these things. But what I absolutely cannot do is not challenge them. So that is off the table. I have to challenge my sources. Otherwise, I don't get the best argument from them. Even if it is, so to speak, for example, for my piece, the NBFCs are the bad guys, so to speak. You could say that my piece will never make that value judgment claim, or my analysis will never make that value judgment claim. It will always be, you are the NBFC, tell me what your strongest argument is. And that requires pushing back. So if I find a source and I push back, I get their strongest argument. And if the piece wins for the borrower, even at the NBFC's strongest argument, that is a much better piece, which would have, just strawmanned NBFC. And that is where things also end up becoming structural, because you cannot bring in the strongest argument without things going structural. So yeah, so this kind of pushback, but pushback in a way which does not like deter your source or make them trust you less or whatever. So that is, yeah, that is probably.
Yeah, it feels like a kind of an elaborate dance
Oh,
that you have
nice.
to do in a more
I like
instinctive way.
I like how you put that. Yeah, I mean, I talk to like 80-year-old sources, and I'm imagining what an elaborate dance with them would actually be like. Pretty cute, actually.
Sure, that's a visual for our listeners. And now that you finally made an escape from the private equity fund situation that you were trying so hard to leave,
Yeah,
I wanted to ask you what some aspects of journalism are that you really enjoy, and what do you think has changed about your sort of professional life after you left your previous job?
I think to begin with, I'm much less anxious, so to speak, because that kind of environment was really anxiety inducing, and you can't do anything if you are constantly in that state. And other than that, I really like the craft. Like, I cannot explain to you how exciting it is to me to create to think through a story. It is almost like thinking through an actual like fiction story, where you have a plot, where you have characters, and each character has their trauma, their history, and their interactions, and the plot is evolving. And uh, the plot is better if it's based in current cultural context and current context of your reader. So imagine like you're making a movie, or you're writing a novella. So it's really nice being able to connect all of these things together. And I think in that narrativizing exercise, uh, I am reimagining a lot of things. I am reimagining existing ways, dominant ways of looking at things, right? So, for example, even after I did my water story, there was somebody I was talking to who was also a source and very much a part of this water activist ecosystem. And I had connected the whole funding thing, and I just like tried to make it all coherent, what is happening. And he told me that it was for him, it was a fresh way to look at it, even though he's been there for 20 years, right? So so that which is like I am able to reimagine existing sort of things. So that I think is very very mm, very very exciting to me, and to the kind of person that I am and have grown up as.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting to me as well. I think I also enjoy that narrativizing part of things a lot.
Yeah.
So it's nice to hear someone else reflect that same excitement and that same sentiment about this kind of storytelling, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Mutasim. That is all the questions I had. If there's anything else that you want to say.
No, I think, thank you. I think this conversation was very cathartic for me. Uh, is the first time I like just talking impromptu about stuff on a public kind of on something that is going to go out. So absolutely enjoyed it and took away a lot of things that I think I will keep thinking about or coming back to. So that's all.
I'm glad. So, that was today's episode of the Documenting Culture podcast. Show notes to this episode are linked in the description. along with mine and Mutasim's socials. Do read Mutasim's stories if you haven't already read them. You can reach out to me with any feedback, comments, criticism, etc. on my email ID, which is documentingculture.pod@gmail.com. My Instagram is street number 4, that is STREETNO.4. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will be back with another episode very soon. See you.